You ever get that feeling like someone's watching you? Not just a glance from a neighbor or a passing car. I mean that deep, unsettling feeling that someone's gone where they weren't supposed to. That your privacy wasn't just disturbed, it was violated. Yeah, that was me. It all started with a letter from my HOA. Nothing explosive, not at first. Just a tidy little envelope in the mailbox. Logo in the top left corner. The usual corporate friendliness stamped on the front. Inside, a notice of violation. Apparently I had a brown patch of grass in my yard that did not meet community landscaping standards and needed to be corrected within 10 days. I blinked, then blinked again. Because here's the thing, the brown patch they were talking about, it wasn't in my front yard, it wasn't even on the side, it was in my backyard, behind a 6-foot wooden fence, next to a concrete retaining wall, completely invisible unless you were looking for it, and I mean really looking for it. There was no way someone could have seen it from the street. No way it showed up in aerial photos. The only possible way to know it was there was if someone walked through my side yard, through my landscaping beds, and peered over the fence like some nosy neighbor in a sitcom. And suddenly, that little letter felt like more than a complaint. It felt like a breach. I stood there in the kitchen holding the letter, staring out my back window. My dog was sleeping under the tree out back, completely unaware that someone had likely trespassed just to report a patch of dry grass that my broken sprinkler had missed. I wasn't angry about the grass. Life had been a bit rough lately. Money was tight. I was juggling work and repairs and just hadn't gotten around to fixing the irrigation system. The patch was maybe 2 feet wide. Ugly, sure, but hardly criminal. But the trespassing? That was different. I called the HOA office to ask a simple question. Which board member or employee entered my yard? The woman on the phone hesitated, asked me to put the question in writing. So I did, and I added one sentence that changed everything. I will happily correct the issue once I have the funds, but I would also like to know which individual was on my property, so I know who to file a police report against for trespassing. I sent it. No threats, no caps, just calm and direct. And then nothing, not a single word, no follow-up, no fine, no second notice. Just silence. I never fixed the grass, and they never contacted me again. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about landscaping. It was about power. About control, about seeing how far they could push and hoping I'd just fold, but I didn't. Because there's one thing HOA boards hate more than non-compliant grass. It's a homeowner who knows their rights. I bought the house 3 years ago, a quiet little 2-bedroom tucked into the back corner of a planned community on the edge of town. Nothing flashy, just a decent yard, some privacy, and a good place to put down roots. At the time, the neighborhood felt like a solid choice. Clean sidewalks, kids riding bikes, retired couples trimming hedges, one of those developments with perfectly spaced mailboxes and weekend barbecue smoke floating through the air. It felt safe. Too safe, maybe. There was, of course, an HOA. I knew. Without going in, read the packet, scanned the rules. They seemed standard enough. No loud parties, no neon paint, keep your lawn alive, that kind of thing. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't looking to cause trouble. I work full-time, long hours. I don't have the time or energy to become a community rebel. I just wanted a place I could come home to, cook dinner, walk the dog, and not think about neighborhood politics. But HOAs, they don't always work like that. At first it was small things. Notices about trash cans being visible from the street, a reminder to trim a bush that was apparently half an inch too tall. Once they sent me a friendly correction because my holiday lights stayed up a few days past New Year's. I laughed those off. Figured someone on the board was bored and needed a hobby. I didn't push back. I just kept my head down. But then came the brown grass. My backyard wasn't anything fancy, just a patch of grass, a few planters along the fence, a concrete slab where I grilled on weekends, the kind of space where you sit with a cold drink and forget the rest of the world exists. At some point, the sprinkler system stopped reaching one spot in the far corner. I meant to fix it, I really did, but time got away from me and money was tight. Between a busted car repair and some medical bills, lawn care dropped down the priority list. The patch wasn't huge, maybe a few square feet, but it browned fast. In the Florida sun. Still, it was behind a solid fence facing a concrete wall. There was no alley back there, no neighbor windows, no hill or ledge where someone could peek over. Which meant only one thing. Someone had to enter my yard to see it. Not accidentally, not while passing by, deliberately, and that changed everything. I started wondering, was it during the day? At night? Did they step on my planters? Did my dog bark? Was someone crouching down, camera in hand, snapping photos through the slats? It made my skin crawl, because no matter how peaceful a neighborhood looks on the outside, the clean lawns, the pretty gates, there's always someone watching, always someone looking for something to report, something to control. I had moved here to get away from noise and stress. Instead, I found myself living under a quiet kind of surveillance, the kind where someone trespasses on your property, then tells you how to manage it. I kept the letter on my kitchen counter for a few days, not because I didn't know what to do with it, but because every time I looked at it, something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't just the complaint, it was how official it tried to sound. The formatting, the polite language with its passive-aggressive undertone, and the subtle warning that if I didn't address the matter, the HOA would proceed to the next step of enforcement. They hadn't fined me. Not yet. But the message was clear. Fix the brown patch or start paying. Still, the question kept burning in the back of my mind. How did they see it? I walked around my property like a detective. From the sidewalk, nothing was visible. From the neighbor's side, still nothing. My entire backyard was surrounded by fencing and a retaining wall. The only way to spot that patch was to go into my side yard, through the flower beds, and look over the fence. And once I realized that, something in me snapped. This wasn't just micromanagement. This was trespassing. Someone crossed into my private space, uninvited, unauthorized, just to catch a glimpse of a discolored patch of grass. For what? A sense of control. I picked up the phone and called the HOA office. The woman who answered had a practiced politeness to her voice, the kind you only hear when someone's been trained to deflect questions before you even finish asking them. I said, "I got a notice about dead grass in my backyard." She said, "Yes, sir, that is correct. It was noted during routine compliance review." I asked, "Who noted it?" Because that patch isn't visible unless someone entered my property. There was a pause. A long one. She replied, "I'm not sure. You'd have to submit that question in writing to the board." I could already hear the wall going up, so I did. That night, I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter. Short, calm, professional. I appreciate the notice and intend to correct the issue when financially able. However, I have concerns regarding how this violation was observed. The area in question is located in a part of my property that cannot be seen from any public or neighboring area. Therefore, I am requesting the name of the board member or representative who accessed my property without permission. This is to determine who I will be naming in a police report for trespassing. I printed it, signed it, dropped it in the HOA drop box the next morning, and then I waited. 1 day passed, then 2, then 5. No response, no follow-up, no fine, nothing. The silence spoke louder than any letter they could have sent. They knew someone had gone too far. And the last thing they wanted was a resident who pushed back with legal language. And the nerve to follow through. I never heard from them again. Never got another word about the grass, and I never fixed it, because this wasn't about landscaping anymore. It was about principle, and about reminding them that just because you sit on a board doesn't mean you're above the law. The silence didn't scare me. If anything, it confirmed exactly what I suspected. They had no idea I'd fight back. I wasn't loud. I didn't raise hell on Facebook. I didn't show up at board meetings shouting about injustice. I just pushed back, the way people do when they're tired of being stepped on. There was a kind of satisfaction in that letter I wrote. Calm, calculated, not angry, but dangerous. I didn't threaten. I didn't insult. I just asked a very reasonable question: who trespassed on my private property so I can file a police report? I didn't expect a response. Not really. And sure enough, none came, but you could feel the shift. The HOA, normally so quick to send reminders and warnings, suddenly went radio silent. The next newsletter came out. Not a single word about compliance or community standards. No follow-up notice, no fine escalation, not even a "we'll revisit this later." It was like the whole thing had been quietly erased, buried. And that's when I realized something about people like Karen, the kind who run HOAs like their own personal kingdoms. They thrive on fear, on silence, on people folding under pressure. What they don't know how to handle is someone who knows the rules and uses them better than they do. So I started learning, not just about my rights as a homeowner, but about how far an HOA can legally go. I dug through local property laws. I looked into trespassing statutes. I read every line of the CC&Rs they sent when I moved in, the rules most people throw in a drawer and forget about. Here's what I found. Nowhere in the rules did it say they had the right to enter fenced private property for visual inspections without notice or permission. In my state, trespassing is still trespassing, even if you're on the board of the HOA. And while they can enforce landscaping standards, they can't spy, snoop, or sneak their way into enforcement. If someone from the board or a hired compliance inspector actually walked into my yard without consent, They didn't just break a boundary, they broke the law. That realization was more powerful than any sprinkler system, because the next time they came for me, I was ready. I installed a small motion sensor camera facing the side yard. Nothing fancy, but if anyone stepped foot through, my planters again, I'd know about it. And this time I wouldn't write a letter. I'd call the police. Funny thing though, no one ever came back. Not for the grass, not for a follow-up, not even to introduce themselves like neighbors do. They left me alone. It didn't feel like a victory at first, just silence. But over time, that silence became peace, my peace. Because sometimes all it takes is one clear line in the sand, and the courage to defend it. Let's get one thing straight. Your backyard is not public property. It doesn't belong to the HOA. It's not subject to community walkthroughs. And unless you've given explicit permission, no one has the right to be back there. That's not me saying it. That's the law. Let's talk about it in plain English. Most states in the US have trespassing laws that are very clear. If someone enters your property without your consent, without an emergency, and without legal cause, they're trespassing. It doesn't matter if they're your neighbor. It doesn't matter if they're on the HOA board. It doesn't matter if they're wearing a little badge that says compliance officer. If they stepped through your yard, climbed up your hill, or peeked over your fence by entering your property line, that's a violation of your rights. And in most states, that's a misdemeanor crime. Now you might be wondering, but can an HOA inspect my property? Yes, but only within limits. Here's how it usually works. HOAs can enforce community standards, like lawn maintenance, paint color, or visible clutter. They can send notices, warnings, and even fines if the violation is visible from a public area or neighboring property. But they cannot enter your enclosed or fenced backyard without either written permission from you, emergency access due to safety or legal concerns, fire, flooding, etc. A very specific clause in your governing documents allowing it. And even then, it usually requires notice. And guess what? Most homeowners never read those governing documents. That's why HOAs sometimes assume you won't push back. But if you do read them, and you do respond legally, the game changes. When I wrote that letter asking which board member I should report for trespassing, I wasn't bluffing. I didn't need to raise my voice or throw threats. I just applied pressure in the one place that matters: liability. Because if it came out that someone on the board had stepped onto my property without permission, taken a photo, and used it to file a report, that's not a landscaping issue anymore. That's a legal issue. And no HOA wants their board members being dragged into a trespassing claim, especially not when it's written down and on record. So here's what I want you to know. If your HOA sends you a notice about something they shouldn't even be able to see, don't just panic. Ask yourself, where is the violation located? How could they have seen it? Did they have the right to be on that part of your property? And if the answer is no, start with one simple line in your response. Please advise which individual accessed my private property without permission so I can direct a formal police report. You don't need to scream. You don't need to fight. You just need to remind them that the law protects you too. The funny thing about winning a fight without raising your voice is that you don't always feel it right away. There's no cheer, no applause, no dramatic moment where someone throws down their clipboard and storms off. Sometimes victory just sounds like silence. After I sent that letter, I waited. I didn't fix the brown grass. I didn't call to check in. I didn't follow up. And the HOA, they vanished. No more notices, no threats, not even a passive-aggressive flyer about neighborhood pride or lawn care excellence. It was like the whole thing had been erased. Weeks passed. I saw the same people walking their dogs, watering their plants, waving at each other across the street. But I noticed something different. The board members, the ones who usually carried themselves like they owned every square inch of the neighborhood, didn't make eye contact with me anymore. Karen, or whatever her real name was, walked by my house once, eyes straight, her head face tight. She didn't wave, she didn't stop, she didn't glance at my yard. And I didn't mind one bit. I didn't ask for revenge. I wasn't looking to embarrass anyone. I just wanted what every homeowner should have: the right to privacy, the right to peace, the right to not feel like my own backyard was being monitored by people who thought a brown patch of grass was some kind of threat to society. And maybe the most satisfying part? I never did fix the sprinkler. That patch stayed brown for a long time, grew a little bigger, then faded in the cooler months. Eventually I threw down some mulch and turned it into a little planter box, not because the HOA told me to, because I wanted to. That's the difference. I took control back, quietly, legally, fully, And I didn't need a lawyer or a public showdown or a screaming match to do it. I just needed to say in plain words, "This is my line, and you don't get to cross it." I think sometimes HOAs forget that we're not tenants in an apartment building. We're owners. We bought this property. We pay the taxes, and we're not here to be managed like children. We're neighbors, adults, people with lives and limits. And yes, boundaries. After that, things in the neighborhood felt a little different. Maybe not for everyone, but for me. I walked my dog with my head a little higher, sat on my back patio without glancing at the fence every few minutes, watered my plants because I enjoyed it, not because someone sent a reminder. And every time I passed that quiet little patch of grass, I smiled, because it reminded me of the day I stopped playing defense and started standing my ground. If you're watching this and thinking, that could happen to me, you're not wrong. It probably already has. Because HOAs, the good, the bad, and the clipboard-carrying ridiculous, have one thing in common. They count on people staying quiet, staying unsure, not knowing where the line is and being too afraid to ask. That's how they get you. They send a letter with fancy language and a veiled threat. You panic. You comply. You apologize. You pay. But here's what you need to remember. You are not powerless. Let me give you some things I learned the hard way, and maybe they'll help you avoid a letter like mine, or at least handle it better if one comes. First, always ask how. The HOA found the violation. If you get a notice for something that's not visible from the street, sidewalk, or neighboring property, ask how they saw it, and ask it in writing. Because if they entered your property without permission, that's not enforcement. That's trespassing. Second, don't get emotional in your response. Get precise. You don't need to argue, insult, or start a war. You just need to say something simple like, "Please clarify how this violation was observed. If it required accessing my private property, I would like the name of the individual who entered without permission, so I can direct a formal report to local law enforcement." That one sentence carries more weight than any yelling ever could. Third, read your KISA governing documents. I know no one wants to. They're boring, full of legal jargon, and make your eyes cross after 3 paragraphs. But hidden in there are the rules they think you'll never challenge. You might find there's nothing that gives them permission to walk into your yard, or that their enforcement rules are weaker than they make them sound. Knowledge is power. And in HOA land, it's also protection. Fourth, document everything. Keep every notice, every email, every voicemail. If someone comes onto your property, write it down. Date, time, what you saw, what you heard. If you can, set up a basic camera, even if it's just to cover your side yard or gate. You don't need a fortress. You just need to show that you're watching too. And finally, don't be afraid to push back respectfully, calmly, legally, but firmly, because you're not just a name on their mailing list. You're a homeowner. You have boundaries, and they don't get to decide where those begin and end. So if you ever get that letter, the one with the veiled threats and the official letterhead, take a breath, then take action, because your home is your sanctuary, and no HOA rule is more important than your right to feel safe and respected in your own backyard. It's strange, the things that make you feel watched. You don't always notice it right away. It creeps in like an itch under your skin, a hesitation when stepping outside, a second glance over your shoulder, a question you never used to ask. Who's looking right now and for what? A patch of dead grass? That was all it took to remind me that peace is fragile, that the illusion of a quiet neighborhood can crack the moment someone starts believing they have the right to cross into your space without asking. I didn't start this to prove a point. I wasn't trying to make trouble. I just wanted to be left alone, to take care of things in my own time, in my own way. But the moment they stepped onto my property, the moment they decided my backyard was theirs to judge, that's when it stopped being about grass. That's when it became something else. Entirely. A question of ownership. A question of respect. A question of how far someone would go just to feel powerful, and whether I would let them. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't fix the grass. I just drew a line and quietly dared them to cross it again. They didn't. And I've thought about that a lot since then, not just for myself, but for the people out there who are still getting letters, still walking on eggshells, still feeling like a guest in their own home because someone with a title thinks they know better. If that's you, I want you to hear this. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to break the rules to protect your space. You don't need permission to defend your peace. You just need to know where the boundary is and be willing to stand there calmly when someone tries to step over it, because sometimes the most powerful word you can say is nothing, just silence. The silence that comes when the HOA realizes you're not bluffing. The silence that follows a question they don't want to answer. The silence that returns when they know, finally, that you won't be pushed. And maybe that's the real victory. Not that I kept the grass, not that I avoided a fine, but that I made them think twice before trying it again. Know your boundaries, know your rights, and don't let anyone, HOA or otherwise, walk through your life like they own it. What would you have done? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading. And if you ever get a letter like mine, you'll know exactly what to say.